These files were never meant to be public, but someone reopened them. This is the Dark Bureau. A border is only as strong as the incentives shaping those asked to protect it. Under sodium lights, a truck laden with crimson fruit creeps through an Eastern European checkpoint, the only visible cargo stacked in battered wooden crates. Beyond the blur of uniformed guards casting routine glances, nothing stops, as if some choreography has unfolded here every night for years. But tonight, beneath the crates, a hidden world pulses. A handful of migrants forced motionless, clutching hope and counterfeit documents, their fate riding not just on human concealment, but on a mutually understood silence. The mechanics of this crossing reveal the true shape of a border, not the lines etched on a map, but the unspoken arrangements that allow, sometimes require, laws to be bent. A system of accommodations woven between officialdom and outlaws. The truck drives through, wheels humming, and the law turns its gaze forward. Somewhere deep inside, a spreadsheet tallies another successful crossing. To many outsiders, Europe's borders evoke images of uniform vigilance and impenetrable barriers. But beneath those impressions, an alternate reality persists. Streams of illicit crossings arranged under the noses of authorities sworn to halt them. What appears random is, in truth, the result of structure. Clandestine economies, cultivated relationships, and institutions that both fight and, sometimes, sustain the flow. The Balkan corridor is not a wound left to fester, but a calculated passage, engineered for profit by those who know exactly which gates to tap. Every apparent loophole is, in fact, a systematized answer to the question, who really controls Europe's periphery? Behind every crossing is a logistics labyrinth operated with cold efficiency. The human supply chain is neither rogue nor amateurish, but a living organism, adapting to enforcement patterns, political moments, and market demands. Movement west, a journey measured not in kilometres, but in obstacles, requires more than courage. It depends on a chain of roles stitched together, backroom coordinators, document forgers, drivers lured by steady cash, officials pressured or paid to look away, and the countless intermediaries threading these links. Rarely do migrants or couriers glimpse a syndicate kingpin. Instead, the network is atomized, each cell blind to the greater whole, and therefore insulated against collapse. If one node falters, another pivots. If routes are closed, they reroute with unnerving fluidity. This adaptability frustrates law enforcement, which is structured for concrete threats, not spectral alliances. Syndicates exploit that mismatch, intent on optimizing risk and maximizing returns. For many migrants, the system begins with a rumor. A friend of a friend knows a fixer, or a message circulates on encrypted apps. Recruitment is rarely the stuff of action films. More often, vulnerability is the lure. A mounting debt, illness in the family, or local unemployment pushes men and women toward roles as drivers or escorts. Tasks they grasp are illegal, but appear as survival. Others are recruited through community ties, distant cousins, neighbours, or former classmates now working as scouts. Promises are made, sometimes that smuggling is a humanitarian intervention, sometimes that the crossing will be swift and dignified. The reality proves harsher. Many soon discover contracts are meaningless, passages rerouted at the last moment, balances increase for unexpected obstacles, or threats made against family back home if payment isn't delivered. The whole system is defined by its transactional nature, its resilience forged not in loyalty, but in the desperation and isolation of its participants. The structure is always evolving. Each border operation is planned with a thoroughness rivaling legal logistics giants. Routes mapped across forested trails, minor checkpoints, and commercial vehicle lanes. Safe houses booked and abandoned at a moment's notice. Officials mapped and classified based on their susceptibility. Syndicates learn from every seizure or failed crossing, tracking law enforcement routines and upgrading methods, sometimes using encrypted radios, sometimes posing as tourists, sometimes hiding in plain sight on freight trains. Surveillance reports and policy crackdowns make headlines, but rarely touch the latest iteration of this system. Rather, the more visible the enforcement, the further the pipeline is refined. A cycle where technological investment meets bureaucratic inertia. Bank transfers route through ever more sophisticated channels. Shell companies registered in distant EU cities. Money moving in small sums to avoid alarms. Cash sometimes sent in hand across the same borders it is supposed to secure. Perhaps the most dangerous innovation is the merging of grey zone actors with complicit authority. It is not just criminals and migrants at play, but insiders within ministries, customs, and border police, their cooperation extracted by greed, persuasion, or threat. One week, a local police chief is filmed accepting payment for a wave-through convoy. The next, a customs officer is quietly rotated after investigators catch his signature on falsified cargo manifests. Officialdom, with all its protocols and signatures, is often itself the weak link. Corruption's roots, once embedded, run deep and wide, creating lasting networks of mutual benefit and silence. Each forged passport, each doctored residency permit is a testament to professional craftsmanship, but also to a deliberate neglect on the part of those empowered to scrutinise. For every border guard who is caught, many more go undetected, some too cautious to expose themselves, others simply unwilling to risk a cut of the profits. Despite the relentless churn of investigations, true accountability is rare. National police and international agencies assemble task forces, swapping data, surveilling suspects, and staging multi-country raids. Results are mixed. One high-profile bust might net a handful of couriers, another uncovers a trove of bogus IDs. Yet prosecutions rarely draw up the entire web. Legal barriers, jurisdictional disputes, divergent criminal codes, and political sensitivities frustrate attempts to trace lines up the hierarchy. Each agency's success is partial, eclipsed by the network's decentralised nature. Intelligence is hard-won and quickly outdated. As soon as one corridor is exposed, new ones flicker to life. The syndicates survive not by vanishing, but by breaking apart and reassembling, always a step ahead of the mechanisms that pursue them. The smuggling industry is haunted by the price societies along the route must pay. Towns on the border's edge become transient zones, places where residents trust frays as migrants move through, sometimes knocking on doors for food, sometimes targeted by opportunistic violence. Public services strain beneath the weight of an invisible population, lacking documentation and legal standing. Community leaders, judges and local police oscillate between resolve and resignation, their efforts often colliding with the reality that the problem is systemic. Some see the smuggling as a humanitarian necessity in the failure of the asylum system, others as a corrosive force undermining law, sovereignty, and public cohesion. Perhaps most striking is the way illicit proceeds cycle back into the above-ground economy, laundered into real estate, hospitality businesses, or even local political campaigns, further blurring the boundaries between the licit and illicit. A pivotal rupture came with a whistleblower from a regional customs office, an insider who, for reasons never fully explained, released a trove of internal dossiers implicating ranking officials from 3 neighbouring states. Unlike previous leaks that hinted at isolated bad actors, these files mapped a consistent pattern. Mid-level bureaucrats authorising shipments they knew concealed illicit human cargo, expediting routine customs clearance and flagging upcoming enforcement operations to coordinators. Investigators could finally see not only how complicit officials operated, but how the system scaled up, enabling passage for thousands, month after month. The revelation detonated through the region's institutions. On paper, anti-corruption agencies mobilised, heads rolled, review boards convened, and EU advisors flew into council on best practices. Reforms were legislated. Tighter controls, internal audits, the digital tracking of customs entries. Yet the immediate result was fragmentation, not eradication. The most visible syndicate dissolved, but the void was filled by smaller, copycat networks. Each new group, less centralised and more nimble, absorbed fragments of the old architecture. The decentralisation reduced overall volume, skimming some profits, but made detection significantly harder. Law enforcement chased smaller fish across broader waters, while communities endured the same tides, albeit in subtler, potentially more violent forms, as rival groups competed for routes and alliances. Within months, traffic rerouted, old routes dimmed, while fresh corridors popped up along riverbanks and derelict rail lines. Small-time officials grew emboldened or desperate, seeking ways to recreate lost revenue streams. Communication channels evolved, social media groups closed, replaced by ephemeral messaging and coded talk. Surveillance units in Western and Central Europe reported fluctuating numbers of undocumented arrivals, often accompanied by forged visas, whose origins could be traced, if at all, to a new generation of document forgers inspired by the high-impact investigations. The digital trail grew fainter, and so did confidence that any disruption was more than a temporary speed bump. The institutional response, loud proclamations, new EU-wide coordination centres and community policing, has not erased the underlying incentives. At border towns, the mood is weary. Police draw up patrol schedules knowing that resources are a fraction of what the syndicates deploy. Mayors negotiate strained public services, balancing empathy for migrants against the anxiety of voters and spiralling costs. Some border economies, paradoxically, come to depend on flows of illicit money, rents paid for safe houses, bribes for passage, and cash spent in small shops by those in limbo for days or weeks. Even efforts to channel more funds to enforcement may backfire, feeding opportunities for further corruption and complicity. Perhaps the cruelest legacy is structural. The lines of accountability that should stitch Europe together are revealed as vulnerable seams. International treaties oblige states to police borders, but the reality diverges. One nation's crackdown is met with its neighbours' delayed reforms or reluctance to prosecute. Joint operations celebrate coordination, but deeply rooted mistrust over corruption, data sharing and political risk limits deep collaboration. Border forces, pulled in opposite directions by the demands of security, humanitarian obligation and personal gain, find themselves caught between policy and practice. At the macro level, the Balkan superhighway is more than a pipeline for people. It is a test case for Europe's capacity to sustain legitimacy amid global instability. Each exploit in the system, each official bribed, each forged document waved through, chips at the foundations of public trust in the rule of law. As migration policy is thrown into further crisis across the continent, communities split over whether enforcement, reform, or engagement offers the better future. Meanwhile, the constant churn of illicit movement provides a lesson. The greatest vulnerabilities are not physical, but systemic, rooted in incentives, governance, and the ability to see not just the parts, but the whole. In the final count, the battle is not at the checkpoint, but within the very institutions designed to protect. The Balkan smuggling trade is not a saga of villains and heroes, but of interlocked systems, adaptable, self-protective, and always just beyond the reach of those tasked to dismantle them. Europe's experiment with border control is, above all, a study in adaptation. Every barrier raises the stakes. Every reform inspires new bypasses. As the shadows shift from one corridor to another, so too does the challenge, forcing a reckoning with the realities that lie beneath official paper, stamped visas, and the dull machinery of the state. To truly understand this world is to acknowledge that the rules are most often shaped in the blurred space where law and necessity meet, and every new fix can spark another chapter in a story with no stable end.